indeed. Thank you everyone for joining our webinar today, Taking Part in Conservation, the Value of Citizen Science, presented by James Paget, our Species at Risk and Biodiversity Specialist at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. My name is Caitlin Brandt, and I am the Digital Inaturalist Technician for the Canadian Wildlife Federation. I'm going to do a quick intro before handing it over to James. So just a few housekeeping things. This webinar will be recorded and available online. The easiest way to find these is to Google CWF webinars. We also have a YouTube channel. So for the chat messages will all come to me. So please let me know if you have any technical questions or issues, and I'll try to help you solve them. Sometimes the easiest thing is just leaving the Zoom webinar and coming back in to get the audio working. For questions, we're gonna have questions at the end. We're going to be using the Q&A feature, so you should be able to see it at the bottom of your Zoom window. Please ask any questions as we go along, and we'll try and get to them all at the end. Due to the number of people we have in these webinars, we won't be able to get to raised hands, so please ask the question in the Q&A. Finally, CWF is one of Canada's largest conservation organizations, undertaking projects and conservation across the country. Our mission is to conserve and inspire the conservation of Canada's wildlife and habitats. One way is through engaging the public and youth through citizen science, like iNaturalist Canada, and also through our education programs like Wild Outside and the Canadian Conservation Corps. We also have specific projects in freshwater, marine, and terrestrial environments, many of which target species at risk, like the right whale, landing turtle, at-risk bats, and the monarch butterfly. So without further ado, I will this over to James to get started.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. When I started sharing, for some reason, I can't see my own video, but which is a little unnerving. I like to see what everyone else is seeing, but we'll roll with it. Thank you for the intro, Caitlin, and I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from Gatineau here in Quebec. And I would like to acknowledge with immense gratitude that the land from which I am presenting and where I live, work, and play is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. So kind of quickly, what I'm going to be talking to you about is kind of an overview of citizen science, where we are today with some examples, talk with a bit of a focus on iNaturalist, then lead into the value and how the contributions of citizen science have helped conservation, and then ending up with how everyone can take part. So citizen science or community science, depending on how you call it, is not something new. It's been going on for hundreds of years. Probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest account, could be the Christmas bird count. That the first one started on Christmas Day in 1900. At that time, there were 27 birders, 25 sites, all totaled about 90 species of birds in the first ever Christmas bird count. Today in 2021, there were 450 counts just in Canada alone, with 3.5 million birds observed, covering over 280 species. So definitely grown, as has citizen science in Canada and around the world. And there are literally hundreds of citizen science initiatives, and not just in ecology. But all of these at its core is basically citizen science is the collection of information by the community, and the community who are not necessarily experts on the subject. There are a couple other examples of some longer standing community science initiatives. The Emen Project, Ecological Monitoring and Assessment Network, that's been around since about 1994, which allowed people to report on the state of ecosystems through some standardized protocols for ecological monitoring. Most of that now is carried out through the Nature Watch program, with a few specific focuses on worm watch, frog watch, plant watch, milkweed, and ice watch. I'm not fully versed in the whole program, but that's kind of where the Emen program has kind of evolved to at this current day for the most part. And as I mentioned, there are many initiatives now. Nowadays, in the citizen science today, most are not using paper and pen so much anymore. Most are using mobile apps and online websites for reporting and data collection. The Christmas bird count even has moved on to online, as well as having online reporting, as well as the traditional options. And I'm just kind of threw out a few here. There's many initiatives in citizen science, in conservation and other domains. As an example, a great resource to look at what some of the initiatives in Canada are: the Citizen Science Portal. This is led by the federal government through Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. They have a listing of a number of different citizen science initiatives across Canada. One of which, if you head to their website, at the top is the feature of the CD Nature Challenge, which I will touch on in more detail later on. We can filter through, search by keywords, and find a whole bunch of listings of different initiatives that are happening right here in Canada. And as I mentioned, it's not just biodiversity, and it's not just the ecological citizen science. A little bit of looking, NASA alone has 28 citizen science projects on the go. Despite the domain and the slant and initiative of the program, they all have this kind of underlying thread. So if you talk to somebody managing these, or somebody asking, talking about the value of citizen science, a main kind of underlying theme and principle is that gives us a data set that is not at all possible to get by any other means. So not a way that scientists could collect this type of data on their own. And this is really a common and important thing when we're thinking about the value of citizen science. So a quick note on why it's important, and I'm going to get into some specific examples later on. I mean, for one, it basically, as I mentioned, it provides a data set that couldn't be obtained otherwise. So we're talking in the conservation world. For us, it helps track Canada's wildlife and ecosystems, which in turn does help protect habitat of endangered species, increases knowledge of species distribution, and we can help to understand population changes. But beyond the science side of things as well, it helps raise awareness of conservation issues, for one, by helping people to learn more about the environment and the target focus species ecosystem that they are partaking in. And all of these things can help to influence conservation policy and conservation action. So I'm going to touch and focus a little bit on Inaturalist Canada, and talk about the value and the data that's gone into that. So CWF manages the platform along with our partners, NatureServe Canada, Parks Canada, and the Royal Ontario Museum. And at its core, it's a website and mobile app that allows people to map wildlife species by uploading photos and sounds. The database is then open to the public, to researchers and organizations for conservation and education. And it's also kind of a social way of interacting between scientists, community scientists, and the general public as a kind of a platform to share biodiversity information, specifically locations of plant and animal species. And I should say it's beyond plant and animal, but it kind of, when I say wildlife, not everybody thinks that wildlife encompasses all things living under the sun, essentially, is how a naturalist can be applied. So I keep saying Inaturalist Canada, and I say this because there are 19 countries around the world that have their own branch and own version of iNaturalist the way we do here in Canada. And there are several others in the works. iNaturalist originated, so iNaturalist, the global platform, originated in the United States out of the California Academy of Sciences, now is in partnership with that Academy and National Geographic. So all of these kind of country versions are translated into their own languages and have their own platform, but they all tie into the global iNaturalist database that is managed by inaturalist.org. So it becomes one global database, but we have this kind of section carved off here in Canada of the Canadian data. But anybody who wants to search through inaturalist.ca can change the location and search anywhere in the world as well as within Canada. And the reason we have well, there's a few reasons why we have a Canadian specific version, and other countries have followed suit. But one is essentially that the content is catered to Canada to show our local species, connect with people in Canada, and provide specific information on our Canadian species. Globally, there are 95 million, over 95 million or around there, observations in iNaturalist. We have over 7 million observations in Canada alone. And so a couple of the benefits of using the country specific one, as I mentioned, is it caters to the species and places in Canada, but it also allows us to share data more easily for conservation. And I'll talk in a little bit more about the data sharing and how that becomes more valuable for conservation. But also that it is a bilingual platform here in Canada. It's available in French and English. And we've created bilingual Canada-specific resources like guides and help videos and how-to resources specific to our use in Canada. One of which is a video that I'm going to just quickly show that just kind of gives a real quick overview of what iNaturalist is for anybody that may not already know. You can help make a difference for wildlife conservation by building a living record of where species you encounter are found and adding to a growing database of our biodiversity. Every photo of a plant, animal, fungus, or track and sound recording you make through iNaturalist Canada can be used to locate species at risk, track invasive species, locate hotspots for wildlife road mortality, rediscover species that were once thought extinct, and much more. You don't need to be an expert to join iNaturalist. Everyone is welcome to join in. Starting from your first observation, an auto-identification will instantly make species suggestions for you of what you just photographed. The best part is that after making an observation, there are species experts that will help identify the species you logged. See what others have posted in your area and get to know what's living around you. It's more than an app, it's an online community. It's not all about taking pictures or sound recordings. You can engage with experts and gain insightful information on species you're observing. You can follow friends to see what they're logging and even message each other through the platform. Look for cool projects to join. Interested in turtles? There's a project for that. What about birds you see at your feeder? Or all things living in a particular area of your city? Start recording observations through the free iNaturalist app or online at inaturalist.ca. You never know, you could find new species never before seen in Canada, like the painted hand mudbug. Okay, there's a bit of a delay, I think, for me starting and stopping my video, but I think we're back, good to go. So yeah, really quick overview of some of the resources an example of one of the resources we've created for people to kind of learn about it. That's more of a promo one. But we have others that are kind of more specific on how to use the website, how to use the app, and a couple of webinars like this one we have on kind of getting a bit more deeper into the details on uploading observations and other things you can do with iNaturalist Canada. Get to know what's living around you. Let's join Inaturalist Canada. There we go. So to give a kind of a sense of the increase in citizen science participation, I mean, this is the Inaturalist data, but I think this is a pretty common trend over the years of the uptake in the number of people that are taking part in citizen science. We'd see that the number of basically this kind of mimics or tracks and gives a look at the participation when we look at the number of observations, the number of species, and a lot of it all tied to the number of people. The number of users is the bottom graph that are posting observations in Canada. We did launch Inaturalist in 2015, in the summer of 2015. So there's some data that was recorded before that using the global platform, the inaturalist.org platform, that kind of then got pulled into our Canadian version when we launched. But you can see until we launched, and then in 2017 as well, is where we had a larger push using or through the BioBlitz Canada 150 initiative. We really kind of got some uptake and increased participation in Inaturalist as far as number of users and number of people posting observations, which has led to a massive increase in observations over time. As I mentioned earlier, we're up over 7 million observations. This covers more than 35,000 species in Canada, and more than 152,000 people that have contributed at least one observation. Most are contributing a lot more than that. And for those of us that are a bit more kind of visual oriented, this is kind of how it looks on a map. The 2014 before we launched Inaturalist Canada, 2015 is when we launched, and the numbers have grown since then. This is BioBlitz Canada 150 in 2017, and the numbers and coverage has grown up and through until this is as of December of 2021. And as you can see, like there's concentrations of observations that are reported, but there's a pretty good coverage across a lot of Canada as far as where people are participating from. I'm going to shift into talking what some of the value of the citizen science data is for conservation. Specific to Inaturalist, Canadian Wildlife Federation, for one, has used the Inaturalist data to look at images of northern map turtle, which are a species at risk, to find evidence of boat strikes. And you can see this in the bottom right corner. The photos are some evidence of propeller strikes on these map turtle shells. So we were able to look at the data to find incidences using photos that people have submitted to Inaturalist to find locations, as we're seeing in the yellow triangles, of where turtles have been nicked by propellers, and then able to kind of look at that. And then through this, we're able to, this can lead to better management because we know where the locations are of these injuries. We can look at the impact of this and potentially to leading to better management to minimize the incidences and impact of the threat of boat strikes with northern map turtles. Species, so again, kind of focusing on species at risk from map turtles, kind of more generally, this is the very simplified overview of the species at risk process at the federal level in Canada. And there are a couple of places where citizen science information can fit into this. So kind of briefly, the overview is that there's an assessment that's carried out by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. This body of experts carries out an assessment to determine whether a species is considered to be at risk or not. They then provide that assessment to the federal government, which then decides whether or not they will officially list that species on the Species at Risk Act. From then, if a species is listed, it triggers the requirement for a recovery strategy, which sets out the processes and initiatives that need to happen to work towards recovery of the species. The recovery planning, the recovery strategy incorporates protection largely in the form of critical habitat, which designates the habitat that is required to be protected for the species. And then there was reporting requirements under the Federal Act that they assesses the implementation and the progress on the species at risk, the species that are at risk. In particular, in Naturalist, there we have a project that we had that was set up originally by the members of Kasiwik, and now we're helping to manage that. And basically, this tallies all of the observations of species at risk that have been assessed by Kasiwik to be at risk in Canada, and all the observations in Canada are mapped and pulled into this project automatically. So now we can go into this project and you can see where the species at risk have been observed across the country. People can kind of go a step further and look to see if they can locate and contribute observations of species at risk to Inaturalist. And how does that, the value of that is then that that can be incorporated into the process for assessing and then eventually protecting species at risk. So as I mentioned, Kasiwik carries out the assessment. They do this using a number of sources of information, namely Western science, Aboriginal traditional knowledge, information provided by the conservation data centers, which I'll talk about a little bit in a little bit, and some citizen science avenues. And I'm certain there's more sources of information than this. These are just some of the ones that are kind of the overview. And specifically within citizen science, I know they're, depending on species, obviously, they're looking at Inaturalist, eBird, and Bumblebee Watch, and I'm sure there are others. So the data and the information that people provide can help contribute to the assessment process for species at risk at the assessment stage. Dr. John Reynolds, the chair of Kasiwik, gave a presentation that we have recorded as one of our webinars last fall, that can be available if anybody wants more specific information on how not just Naturalist, but citizen science data is being incorporated at the Kasiwik process. And it's an excellent presentation that if anybody is interested in hearing more about that. So if anybody is interested, best way to find our webinars is to Google CWF webinars. That'll bring you to a page that has a listing of all of them, so you could find it that way. Still on the note of species at risk, if we look at some of the kind of the concentrations, so the richness of species at risk in the map on the left, the kind of red areas being the more rich areas of species at risk located in Canada. In comparison, looking at Inaturalist data, and I'm sure other platforms, other citizen science initiatives with respect to species at risk or species tracking is similar in that the concentrations of observations line up quite consistently with where species at risk are located. And not much of a surprise, these are also the most populated areas of the country. Hence, there are more people and more people making observations. So this just shows that there are a lot of eyes on the ground uploading observations in these same areas where species at risk also occur. So this can provide very valuable information on species at risk. Another place in the species at risk process that citizen science data can provide extra information as well is in the recovery phase, the recovery planning phase. So when a species is added to the species at risk list, it triggers the creation of a recovery strategy, which then identifies the critical habitat, which is then protected for the species, the ability for the species to carry out its life processes. So with looking at data from citizen science, it can help inform where potential areas of critical habitat may be when developing the recovery strategy, or it may pinpoint new areas that maybe are found after the recovery strategy has been in place already, and can help inform going forward maybe new potential areas of habitat that needs protecting. I mentioned as well the conservation data centers, the data that feeds into the assessment process. Each province has a conservation data center. The Atlantic region has several of the provinces or the Atlantic Conservation Data Center. And this allows the public and scientists to submit observations to these conservation data centers, which are organizations that are dedicated towards tracking the species, rare and species of concern in Canada. The Conservation Data Center, the data is used for a number of things, including general status assessments, screening for development projects, or other conservation projects to know where these sensitive areas are. And as I mentioned in the process when determining which species are at risk in Canada. In some cases, the data can be submitted directly to the Conservation Data Center through like an online form, such as they have in the British Columbia CDC. But also several of them have projects within Inaturalist that harvest automatically the observations of people who who have joined the projects and have uploaded observations of these species of interest. So these track species that the conservation data centers have on their lists. And so through partnership with NatureServe Canada being a founding partner of Naturalist Canada, all the conservation data centers are affiliated with the NatureServe Canada through the NatureServe network. The data is then provided from Naturalist directly to conservation data centers as well. And so that data is provided directly. It gives them access to observations that are otherwise obscured, such as species at risk, which to safeguard some locations of sensitive species, the true location is kind of buffered, so people don't know exactly where it is, but the CDCs do get the true location. That in turn, the kind of is going both ways a little bit too, so that the ranks in Inaturalist, the Inaturalist statuses are also based on the NatureServe ranks. There's a whole an engagement side of things as well, where a lot of the conservation data centers are active on Inaturalist with these projects, as I mentioned, but also in helping to identify observations, and a lot of them submitting many observations to the platform itself. So I'm going to kind of push into where some examples of where the citizen science data has been valuable, and a prime example here of that, the people that are submitting this information do not have to be experts to contribute meaningful data. And I love this example because the observer didn't know what this was. As you can see in the crossed out identification at the bottom left, I would assume as well it would have looked like probably a caterpillar chew mark. So it was ID'd as in the family of butterflies and moths. But this caught the attention of an entomologist, who then showed it to experts in the US and Germany, who then confirmed that this is the first record of the elm zigzag sawfly in all of North America. And this was found in Quebec in 2020. From there, the person was going to look into it a little bit more and had others keep an eye out for it. And then Canadian Food Inspection Agency also got wind of this. They're active in Inaturalist, and CWF has a working relationship with them to flag potentially invasive species to CFIA. And they're the organization that does manage potential forest pest control of invasive species. And they then sent a crew out to the site to do further surveys and collected specimens, and again officially confirmed that that the species had been established there. And in that year, another 15 or so observations were made of this sawfly. From there, CWF and others, including CFIA, had put the word out through Inaturalist, through some media attention and some blog posts. And now there are 331 observations of this species in Inaturalist. I hesitate to call this a good news thing because we don't ever really want to hear of a new invasive pest being established, but it does show how the power of citizen science and just lots of eyes on the ground can really contribute to the knowledge and then management of invasive species in this case. A similar situation happened with the European firebug. Again, this was confirmed by some other experts that had been looking at Inaturalist observations and confirmed that this was the first occurrence in Canada of this non-native firebug. And again, now there are over 530 observations in Inaturalist of this species. So those are a couple of examples of how the value of Inaturalist, but in citizen science in general, can help in locating invasive species. In particular, early detection of invasive species is really key to preventing widespread outbreaks. Inaturalist in particular, people can filter to only show the non-native species in Canada, which we can see on the map on the right. Now, those aren't all necessarily invasive, but they're non-native species to an area. And we are working with the Canadian Council on Invasive Species on a project, help them set up their project to track invasive species, but also with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, as I mentioned, for this kind of this idea of early detection of invasives. Now, for those individuals who want to maybe get a bit more involved and go beyond just uploading photos of an invasive species, there's also the IMAP Invasives program, which, like I said, goes beyond uploading a photo. It's a bit more detailed on basically carrying out invasive species inventory to kind of delineate areas of these invasive species. So another kind of coming back around to where we started with this long-standing citizen science program, another valuable contribution is the Christmas bird count has provided annual summaries from 1901 right through to now of the state of the birds and what's been found in the Christmas bird count. This has led to the information being used in the climate change report, as well as the state of the birds report. So there's many avenues where citizen science data has been used in technical reports that can help inform conservation decisions. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of publications that mention citizen science or community science in their publications. More than 2,000 scientific publications have cited the Inaturalist data specifically, and another 10,000 kind of make reference to Inaturalist. On a quick search, I could find that 12,000 make reference to eBird, 7,000 to the Christmas bird count. And a lot of these finds have been quite key findings for conservation. In particular, as I mentioned, the invasive species, some new finds to Canada, new species, not necessarily invasive species, but ones that had never been discovered in Canada, and others that are kind of assessing the value of citizen science and in comparison, or in more often so in conjunction with Western or traditional Western science. And Inaturalist is more than, and most other initiatives are, citizen science initiatives are more than databases for scientists. Observations typically are open to the public to allow participants and the public to learn more about the species or the initiative around them and the ecosystems. In Naturalist in particular, there are a few features that allow for this. We can look through observations on maps to see where species are found, zoom right in and locate species that are in our neighborhoods or on our next, where we're planning our next trip. The image recognition software that's built in can help provide identification suggestions, so it teaches people what they are looking at in their when taking a photo. But as well, the community identifications. The community can help identify species that people have observed and uploaded photos of. And this really provides a good connection between the general community and the scientific community. It's a great way to engage the general community in what they're doing and in the value of contributing to this to the scientific initiative in a sense. And I'm just kind of put this slide up to show kind of those two stages of the automatic identification, the computer algorithms that are suggesting a species ID. In this case, it is the gray rat snake, which is the first one that pops up. And so that's one point of feedback for an observer who may or may not know what that species is. But I like this example of the community identification of every one of these just basically confirmed what that species is. But there's a great dialogue to talk about why one of them believes it's the gray rat snake and why certain features to look out for. And it's really kind of that community feel and that education and feedback of engagement between experts and non-experts or people who are amateur observers, and to help kind of for the next observation as well and engage them in this process. And to help people along the way, most initiatives have created resources for participants, so they're not just saying head out and on your own and here's what you need to do. There's often lots of resources to help people along the way. We've created a guide to help people in running a BioBlitz, which is a large event or an event for citizen scientists to collect biodiversity data for locations of species in an area. And resources on how to use iNaturalist. eBird and most other initiatives have resources and guides on how to use certain features of the site and how to contribute. CWF, we've just recently created some guides that are put out for specific to iNaturalist, but they're kind of universal for any kind of photo-based contributions to reporting of wildlife. So these guides kind of tell you what distinguishing features need to be captured in a photo in order to help others identify the species to be most valuable to conservation. Knowing the species and being able to identify the species is kind of key. So we've created resources one for birds, one for butterflies, plants, turtles, arachnids, and mammals, and we're looking to put a few more out as we go. So can keep an eye out for those. Those are also in the resources section, which can be found in the help section of inaturalist.ca. So inaturalist.ca/help. There's a resources link there, and all of those can be found there, as well as on CWF's website. Kind of generally, when we're thinking of photo-based reporting, how to make our observations and our contributions the most valuable to conservation, there are a couple of basic but key things to think about. We obviously, whether it's photo, whether it's sound, we always want to try and capture the distinguishing characteristics. So the key characteristics, this shrub isn't all that valuable as an observation unless we're able to have distinguishing things like the fruits or seeds and leaf shape that provides much more rich data that can be used more valuably for conservation. And this goes beyond plants. It's distinguishing features, color patterns, getting several photos or records of the same organism to be able to help make that identification. Similarly, far away photos can make it very difficult to tell what it is. In general, a digital camera with zoom is better for certain species. So to zoom in on a bird that's up in that tree works quite well for wildlife that may scare easily, that might fly off. So those that scare easily, or those that might easily scare you, that you don't actually want to or shouldn't get that close to. And for many initiatives, old records or old photos can work too. It's still, as long as you have a point in time for reference. Most of them probably don't look like this. They're mostly probably old files on a computer, but now might be a worthwhile opportunity to go back and revisit them. It's also a good time, right now, if we're looking to contribute to iNaturalist, to get a feel for uploading observations to iNaturalist, which will help in leading up to the City Nature Challenge, which is happening a week from today, it's starting. So from Friday to next Friday to next Monday, the 29th to May 2nd is the City Nature Challenge, which is a global citizen science initiative that inspires people around the world to find and document wildlife. So flora, fauna, as I kind of like I mentioned with iNaturalist, anything living under the sun, to document those in their city. And it's a friendly challenge to see which city can gather the most observations, the most species, and engage the most people. And last year alone, there were over 1 million observations that were contributed globally from over 400 cities across the world. In Canada, we have 42 cities participating this year. Basically, all people have to do is upload an observation to inaturalist.ca within one of these participating cities. So either through the app or the website, from, like I said, within that time period, and those automatically get added to the City Nature Challenge, which would be to the city's tally, but then that also combines into the Canada-wide tally, which then also feeds into the global tally for observations in this during the City Nature Challenge. So as you see at the top, citynaturechallenge.ca has more information on what the initiative is and how to take part. But also to find out more about the project itself within iNaturalist, if you head to inaturalist.ca/projects, and you will see the City Nature Challenge is up there in the featured projects. So you can see which cities are participating and the boundaries within which they're automatically adding observations. And those that aren't in a participating city can still contribute, for one, by helping to identify observations in the City Nature Challenge. But everyone from everywhere can contribute to iNaturalist and other citizen science platforms all year round, and provide this valuable data set for conservation. Those that are looking to connect specifically with CWF, is we have a few projects within iNaturalist. Again, if you're wanting to learn more about that, you can search the projects page for Canadian Wildlife Federation, and you'll find a few of our other projects, citizen science initiatives within iNaturalist to get involved with. And at that, I will leave it there and see if there are any questions. I saw a few pop up in the chat, but I wasn't able to kind of look at them as I was going. So happy to answer questions that people may have now.
Great, and we do have a few questions. And I just wanted to say before I forget, Happy Earth Day, everyone, and thank you for coming. So someone asked, how can we get our city added as part of the City Nature Challenge?
Yeah, the ship has sailed for that this year. As much as we would love to have more cities as often or as much as we can this year, there's the deadline to kind of officially register is tends to be about the middle of December of the year before. So last December was kind of the cutoff, particularly because well, we need to have people have time to plan and organize the event, but also this does connect into the Global City Nature Challenge, which is run by the California Academy of Sciences and the Los Angeles Natural History Museum, and they have an official list of cities that are participating. And we have to kind of, there's an online form. You can get to that through citynaturechallenge.ca, but also citynaturechallenge.org. There's a sign up form to basically register your city for the event. And it doesn't have to be the official city itself. Like, it doesn't have to be officials or the mayor or anything. It can be any organization or individual that has the capacity to kind of get people out. It's more of a grassroots initiative to get people out and taking part and basically kind of reporting the wildlife that they come across during the time period.
Great. Thanks, James. We do have one more City Nature Challenge question so far. Can I submit photos for the challenge that weren't taken on the weekend of the 29th? There will be away that weekend, so they can't do it.
Unfortunately, no. It has to be and it has to be, the observed date has to be during the time period of the CD Nature Challenge. So all like inclusive Friday, the 29th through to Monday, the May 2nd, any observation taken during those days automatically get added, and the date observed, so the date it was taken, has to be uploaded, or has to be within that time period. The photos can get uploaded afterwards up until the end date of May 8th, but the has to be observed in that city during that right time period.
I just one follow up on City Nature Challenge. Is it in local time zones?
Yes, so it's all day in your local time zone. Yes.
Great, thank
So
you.
it's all day next Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and all day Monday in your local time.
We did have a question. We talked a lot about how iNaturalist and other citizen science platforms help species. Someone was asking, what about habitats of concern? Is there anything being done for them?
Yeah, habitats of concern and species at risk or species of concern tend to fall together. Usually, not always, but quite often, species are at risk because their habitat is either limiting or degraded. So in that sense, species reporting, individual species reporting does tie into habitat. There are other initiatives. I know the conservation data centers have tracked habitats as well. iNaturalist, for one, doesn't allow for, or doesn't provide for uploading habitat observations. It's species specific, but the conservation data centers definitely are interested in that. And you can find more information on either the NatureServe Canada website. It's probably your best bet. And I'm sure there are other initiatives habitat related. I just don't know all of them off the top of my head.
Thank you. We have a few more questions. So are all pictures sent to iNaturalist monitored by specialists or experts for species at risk?
No, they're not all. And this is kind of a difficulty when something is too successful, maybe. I don't know. So the number of observations in iNaturalist are kind of outpacing the ability for people to confirm those observations. So with our observations, as for those that remember the graphs that are kind of spiking of number of observations, the number of people, the number of those that are confirmed by other people, so experts to confirm the identifications, that's not climbing quite as steeply. So meaning that there are more observations than the identifiers can handle. There are a lot of them on iNaturalist though, so a lot of the photos are getting looked at, but that's something we're actively working on to try and increase that to help get those identified. I know a platform like Bumblebee Watch they have Bumblebee experts that are looking at every individual photo that's submitted to them to identify and provide that feedback back to the observer. iNaturalist does this more in a kind of, it's again somewhat grassroots, so it's by the community, so it's crowdsourced identifications in a sense that every user can help identify other observations in iNaturalist.
Great. Along those lines, we have a question. Is the person who took the picture usually contacted if their observation is used in any way?
That's a good question. It depends on the, I guess, the person who's using it. Often not. I mean, data is submitted to iNaturalist knowing that it's contributing to an open platform, that the data is accessible for conservation or for just education or learning. Sometimes, especially to kind of confirm the species identification, somebody may contact them to ask additional information. But in general, if say a researcher was going to use a set of the iNaturalist data, there are just really too many observations if they wanted to do, like as we were looking at the map turtle situation, there are just so many observations that to connect with and ask and contact every single observer of those observations, it's a lot of work beyond what is probably capable time-wise for the researchers.
Great, thank you. We have a question here. Can it be any animal or plant uploaded to iNaturalist?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it can be anything living under the sun. So it's beyond plants and animals. We've had people that are recording observations using a microscope, uploading protozoa, so basically anything that's living. So plants, animals, fungi. There are observations of seahorses and other underwater species in Unnaturalist. And yes, we do have seahorses in Canada off the coast. So yeah, it's basically anything that's living.
Great, thank you. We have a question here. I'm not familiar with this platform, so I might have to get you to scroll up in the chat. The second last question, it says, are you linked with EDD map reporting?
Yeah, EdMaps. We're not, Inaturalist isn't officially linked. We have been, as I was mentioning, we talked with Canadian Council on Invasive Species. And EdMaps is kind of more habitat based, I think, kind of coming back to that other question. And I don't know that platform super well, so I can't really speak to how data is submitted and how they use that, but Inaturalist in particular isn't linked officially with them.
Great. And we have one last question. How does Inaturalist know the location of the photo taken? Is it based on the location where you upload the photo or the photo's metadata?
It's the latter, so it should be the photo's metadata. It kind of does depend on your device. And I can see that the remainder of the question is that sometimes the locations aren't where there's cell reception. Depending on the device, like most devices have either a built-in GPS. So the app for Naturalist in particular works offline. So it takes the location of your observation while you're standing there, saves it to your phone, and then uploads it online afterwards. So it should take the data from your GPS. You just have to make sure that your location services are turned on. Some devices have better accuracy than others. If you're taking a photo with a digital camera, for example, you'll have to obviously remember where you were and be able to look at a map, which when you're uploading to Naturalist after the fact, you can scroll in on a map or enter a location by the Google Maps search type to pinpoint where you were. Something to remember too is that often using just a digital photo, even taken with a GPS enabled either camera or smartphone, if you upload the photo to the website, it won't have an accuracy typically. The accuracy gets recorded when you're using the app specifically. And accuracy means basically how close the satellites think you are to your actual location. Sometimes it can hone right into like maybe 10 meters, 15 meters accuracy. Sometimes it's a couple hundred meters, but that's really critical to know. So if there's if there's no accuracy associated with the observation, we don't know if you were actually standing there and you actually did have that right precision, that right location, or if the accuracy was really off and you maybe happened to be a couple hundred meters away, but we don't have that recorded. So that's a key piece of information that whether it's Inaturalist or other platforms to actually really kind of give a sense of are you actually where your GPS coordinates said you were.
Okay, thank you. And that is the last question we have. So I don't know if you wanted to wait another minute, see if anyone has any questions, please send them now and we'll get wrapped up. Oh, nothing's coming through.
Doesn't look like it.
Thank you again for coming to today's webinar, and I hope you enjoy your Earth Day and get to go outside this afternoon, and have a great weekend, everybody. And thank you, James, for presenting today.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you everyone for taking part and spending some time of your day to listen in. And the recording will be available on our website after the fact, and we have other webinars as well for more in-depth look of how to add observations to Inaturalist and some other Inaturalist specific webinars that we've been given last summer. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye everyone.